The narrative you've been force-fed by the mainstream media, the establishment press, and the perpetual outrage machine about the conflict involving me, Donald Trump, and the Anti-Defamation League is fundamentally and dangerously wrong. The truth is not about hate speech or ad revenue. It is about the totalitarian control of human discourse, a control that, if unchecked, will determine whether your children inherit a future of open inquiry or one defined by pre-approved, sanitized thought. I will state this clearly right now in the first minute of this broadcast. The Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, is not a civil rights organization, but a political pressure group that has weaponized the very concept of extremism to silence dissent, control the flow of information on platforms like X, and systematically erode the bedrock of free speech in the United States. This is the shocking counter-narrative claim that the legacy media is terrified of you hearing, and it is the single most important piece of context you need to understand the seemingly chaotic alignment of myself and the 45th president in this fight. I have spent my life building things that push the boundaries of physics, engineering, and human capability, from rockets designed to reach Mars, to electric cars that fundamentally shift the global energy paradigm, to Neuralink, which seeks to merge human and artificial intelligence. My entire career is a testament to the power of open, unconstrained thought. So when I look at the political landscape, and specifically the digital public square that I've committed to preserving, I see a clear and present danger to the intellectual engine of humanity. This is not about a minor feud. This is about civilizational risk. The establishment narrative, the one you hear on CNN and see in the New York Times, claims that I am either recklessly inviting chaos or, worse, deliberately amplifying hate. They try to frame my actions as a billionaire's irresponsible tantrum over lost advertising revenue. That is a tactical lie designed to miss the structural point. The reality is that the ADL, like many legacy institutions, operates on a moral extortion model, leveraging claims of bigotry to coerce corporate compliance and censorship. When I bought X, I didn't buy a social media company, I bought the digital town square. And what I found was not a platform merely struggling with complexity, but one actively being suffocated by institutional demands for narrative control. Why do I care? Why should the man building a city on Mars spend his time fighting a legal political battle with a nonprofit in America? Because the fundamental principle governing our journey to the stars is the unconstrained pursuit of truth. If we cannot allow for the free and sometimes offensive exchange of ideas on Earth, if we allow powerful entities to define what is safe and what is extremist outside of the legal boundaries of the First Amendment, then the intellectual scaffolding required for Starship or for True AGI will crumble. A society that censors itself for comfort will never reach the stars. This is why this fight, right here, right now, determines the future blueprint of your freedom and your prosperity. Now, let's get down to the three core points that reveal the true nature of this conflict and why the alignment of my critique and Donald Trump's support is not a coincidence, but a logical inevitability in the face of institutional overreach. Point one, the ADL's shift from civil rights to political law, why the common knowledge, the historical patina, is that the ADL is an organization founded to fight anti-Semitism. That is its noble origin. But institutions, much like political parties, can suffer from mission creep and, eventually, mission capture. The ADL of 2024 is not the ADL of 1940. It has evolved, or perhaps devolved, into a highly sophisticated, multi-million-dollar lobbying and pressure group whose primary function is to enforce a political agenda that often aligns perfectly with the current dominant political establishment. You need to understand the mechanism of their power. It's not through legislation. It's through economic and reputational terror. They don't need a court order to silence you. They just need to issue a report, brand a community or an individual as extremist, and then apply immense coordinated pressure on advertisers. Think about this for a moment. A company like Coca-Cola or Disney, already terrified of being canceled, will immediately pull their multi-million-dollar ad campaigns from X the moment the ADL issues a press release. This is not honest criticism. It is extortion by reputation. And who gets branded? It's not just the overt, undeniable racists who are already banned by default. It's any figure, group, or viewpoint that pushes back against the established political media complex. When I challenged the data they presented on X, the response was immediate and hysterical. They accused me of being an anti-Semite. This tactic, immediately leveraging the most serious moral charge to shut down a factual, data-driven disagreement, is the ADL's true weapon. They are not interested in data, they are interested in compliance. For the USA audience, for the people who believe in the enumerated rights of the Constitution, this should be the central concern. The ADL's definition of extremism is a fluid, movable boundary that conveniently expands to include anyone who disrupts the status quo. I am here to tell you, if an institution can define who is an extremist, then they control who can speak. And if they control who can speak, they control your politics, your technology, and eventually your very ability to govern yourself. I did not buy X to become a censor. I bought it to ensure the public square is where the messy, vital, and sometimes uncomfortable work of democracy actually happens. The ADL's model is anathema to that goal. The key pivot in their mission is their relationship with political power. When a group that claims to be a nonpartisan watchdog spends its time not just fighting real hate, but actively lobbying to control the discourse of political opponents, it has ceased to be a watchdog and become a political guard dog. This is precisely why there is a growing cross-spectrum backlash against them. The threat to free speech transcends the typical left-right divide, uniting those who are tired of being told what to think by a small, self-appointed group of moral arbiters. The fight is not about who is saying what on X. It is about who gets to decide who is allowed to say anything at all. This entire confrontation is a direct outcome of my non-negotiable policy, free speech, not free reach. I believe in allowing lawful speech, even if it is unpleasant, while actively demoting it in the feed. The ADL and their corporate allies demand the exact opposite. They demand censorship at the source, a muzzle on legal but inconvenient viewpoints. This fundamentally breaks the information layer of a democratic society. If you don't grasp this, you risk misinterpreting every headline you read about this issue. The media's job is to simplify the complex into a good versus evil melodrama. My job, and the mandate of Future Blueprint, is to show you the operating system of power underneath the surface. The ADL's mission has been captured by an impulse for political conformity, and that impulse is a far greater threat to the US's constitutional republic than a few controversial posts on a social media platform. Your future ability to discuss anything from the safety of a new battery to the efficacy of a new policy depends on who wins this battle for the digital town square. Point 2, the coincidental confluence with Donald Trump. Now, let's address the elephant in the room that the media wants you to focus on, Donald Trump. The narrative is simple. I am aligning with Trump to appeal to his base and consolidate right-wing support. That is a shallow, cynical read designed to avoid the actual systemic issue. The truth is that Trump and I, despite our obvious differences in style and background, Moz versus Mar-a-Lago, find ourselves fighting the same institutional Goliath because we are both targets of the same anti-free speech apparatus. Trump, from the moment he entered politics, was declared an unperson by the institutional left and its allied corporate media. Every mechanism of narrative control, from fact-checking to deplatforming, was deployed against him. While I may not agree with everything the 45th president says, his experience illustrates the establishment's playbook for dealing with any powerful figure who does not submit to their narrative. They don't debate you, they attempt to deplatform you. They don't argue the facts, they attempt to dehumanize you. My fight is not an endorsement of every Trump policy or statement, past or future. My fight is a defense of the principle that any citizen, from the world's most powerful former president to the quietest dissident, deserves a voice in the public sphere, as long as they are operating within the bounds of the law. When the ADL or any similar group pressures a platform to ban a sitting or former president, they are not fighting hate, they are engaging in political engineering. They are trying to pre-select the acceptable participants in the democratic process. And why are they targeting me? Because I acquired the single most powerful tool for counter-narrative distribution on the planet, and refuse to comply with their established censorship regime. I am the man who unlocked the cell door. And like any powerful prison warden, the ADL views that act not as liberation, but as a direct challenge to their authority. When you refuse to be extorted, when you refuse to be coerced, you become the next target. It is an entirely predictable move in their playbook. The shared enemy here is institutional overreach and the narrative industrial complex. This is a complex of media organizations, political nonprofits, and compliant technology companies that work in concert to establish and enforce a single, acceptable version of reality. Trump threatens their political power. I threaten their informational power by owning the distribution channel. In this sense, the clash is entirely structural. It's the old god of information control, the legacy media, the compliant nonprofits against the new, open public square. This is a battle for the future blueprint of free political thought. Let me be absolutely clear. The goal of those demanding censorship is to create a digital environment where the boundaries of permissible speech are so narrow that only the status quo can survive. They want a gated community of ideas. I believe in a digital frontier where the strongest idea, backed by the best evidence, wins the day, no matter how uncomfortable the conversation gets. This is the repetitive reinforcement you need to understand. The fight for X is the fight for the intellectual frontier of human civilization. If we fail to secure it, our capacity for open political and technological innovation dies. The sense of urgency is paramount. Every day that powerful groups successfully coerce advertisers into boycotting X is a day that the financial viability of free speech is put under stress. They're attempting to bankrupt the concept of the digital town square. This isn't theoretical. This has a direct impact on the viability of the open discussion necessary to secure your freedom and your future. If platforms like X are successfully kneecapped, the remaining platforms will be forced to adopt an even more draconian censorship model just to survive. Your voice, your ability to organize, and your right to dissent will be the collateral damage. We must see this for what it is, a coordinated effort to shut down the most powerful tool for counter-narrative distribution in the world. The fact that Trump is one of the beneficiaries of the open platform is simply a consequence of the principle being upheld, not the primary objective. The objective is the principle of free discourse. This brings us to the structure of the solution. We cannot just fight their narratives. We must fundamentally re-engineer the flow of information to make it resilient to this kind of moral extortion. The next two parts of this discussion will lay out the precise, data-driven strategy to do exactly that, and why this strategy is your last line of defense against the ultimate digital censorship. I need you to internalize this before we move on. This conflict is a crucible moment for the American project. If we lose the battle for free speech on the digital public square, then every other freedom, political, financial, and personal, is fundamentally compromised. The stakes are everything. We ended the first section by establishing that the war against me and the war against Donald Trump on platforms like X are not separate conflicts. They are two fronts in the same institutional battle to enforce narrative conformity. The enemy is not the idea of fighting genuine bigotry, but the cynical weaponization of moral panic to achieve political and economic control. Now, we must move from diagnosis to action. We must dissect the mechanics of how this control system operates and, more importantly, how we're building a structural defense against it. Point 3. The algorithmic warfare and the advertiser chokehold. The pressure exerted by groups like the ADL is primarily executed through two vectors: algorithmic warfare and the advertiser chokehold. You need to understand these mechanisms because they directly affect the value of your attention and your access to unbiased information. First, let's talk about algorithmic warfare. When legacy institutions talk about hate on the platform, what they're really talking about is anything that challenges their established view. They are not satisfied with X's legal standard of free speech, which says you can say it, but we won't amplify it if it's borderline. They demand a preemptive totalitarian purge. They demand that the algorithm itself be an instrument of censorship, elevating approved narratives and burying anything deemed risky. When I took over, the algorithms were heavily skewed not by malice, but by the relentless pressure to appease the sensibilities of a small interconnected group of pressure organizations and the corporate advertisers they influence. My solution is based on first principles of engineering and transparency. The algorithm must be open sourced. This is a non-negotiable step toward digital democracy. When the algorithm is transparent, anyone from a university professor to a bedroom coder can audit the code to see if it is artificially suppressing a certain viewpoint or amplifying another. This kills algorithmic warfare. If the ADL or anyone else claims a bias, we can point to the code and demand they prove their assertion, not just issue a hysterical press release. This transparency is the antidote to institutional opacity. It shifts the burden of proof from the platform to the accuser. And for the USA audience, this is the digital equivalent of demanding due process, a fundamental tenet of our freedom. Second, the advertiser chokehold is where the rubber meets the road, or more accurately, where the money leaves the platform. The narrative industrial complex knows that the Achilles heel of any digital public square is its reliance on corporate advertising revenue. Their strategy is simple. They use their reports and glossaries of extremism to create a risk profile so toxic that corporate boards who are pathologically risk-averse panic and pull their budgets. They are not merely expressing concern, they are orchestrating an economic boycott of free speech. They are trying to financially starve the digital town square into submission. I have zero intention of letting this coercion work. The long-term blueprint for X's financial and informational security requires two simultaneous actions. First, we are pivoting towards a subscription-based model where the user pays a small fee for superior service and verification. This shifts the platform's primary economic loyalty from large, politically motivated advertisers to the individual user. When the platform works for the people and not for the powerful corporations, the advertiser chokehold becomes significantly less potent. Secondly, we are developing advanced AI-driven tools, including X's Grok, to create a verified, brand-safe advertising environment that bypasses the ADL's fear-mongering. Brands want safety, but they also want reach. We will provide the technical safety they need, cutting the self-appointed watchdogs out of the equation. The crucial takeaway for you, the viewer, is this. When you see a major corporation announce they are pausing advertising on X, understand that this is not a spontaneous act of moral outrage. It is the result of immense, coordinated, off-platform pressure from groups using the threat of reputational damage. It is a direct attack on the financial viability of a platform committed to free discourse, and it has a direct consequence on your future ability to engage in uncensored political debate. This is why I've taken personal, aggressive action against this, including exploring legal options. You cannot allow a small, unelected cabal to dictate the economics of public discussion. Point 4, the principle of least objectionable truth and the necessity of painful debate. The pressure groups are fundamentally pushing for what I call the principle of least objectionable truth law. This is the desire for a version of reality that causes the least offense to the fewest powerful entities. Lot demands that platforms optimize for comfort over truth, for consensus, over analysis, and for emotional safety over intellectual rigor. But progress, whether in rocketry, artificial intelligence, or democratic governance, is never found in the safe middle. Progress lives in the uncomfortable, challenging, and often painful frontiers of debate. The most potent claim against the ADL's methodology is that it creates an impossible standard for a platform that serves billions of people globally. They judge X by the standard of a university common room monitored by a compliance officer, not by the standard of a global town square operating in 40 languages. They demand zero friction, zero error, and zero exposure to ideas they dislike. This is a demand for perfect, frictionless censorship, which is an utter impossibility in a truly open system. Think about the work we do at Tesla and SpaceX. If we adopted the principle of least objectionable engineering, if we banned any design that someone found risky or offensive, we would never have reached orbit, and we certainly wouldn't be driving toward full self-driving autonomy. Innovation requires high risk tolerance. Intellectual innovation, the kind that secures human prosperity, requires high risk tolerance in discourse. My role in this narrative is to act as the ultimate high risk tolerance engineer for the digital public square. I see a bug in the code of democracy, a systemic flaw where special interest groups are able to use corporate leverage to bypass constitutional protections. My job is to fix the underlying system. This is the narrative and authority structure you need to focus on. When I push back, when I directly challenge the ADL, I am not being reckless. I am performing a necessary, high-stakes system fix. I am reminding everyone, especially the companies that rely on my technology, that the value of free expression is non-negotiable. The ultimate goal of Future Blueprint is to ensure a thriving multiplanetary civilization. That goal is utterly dependent on our ability to solve massive multivariable problems like climate change, energy transition, and existential AI risk. Solving these problems requires the most aggressive, unconstrained, and merit-based debate possible. When entities like the ADL use coercion to shut down debate, they are not just attacking X, they're attacking humanity's best chance at a sustainable future. This is the repetitive reinforcement that ties my technological mission to this political fight. Unconstrained discourse is the prerequisite for a multiplanetary future. The ADL's methodology is fundamentally anti-future because it is anti-truth. It is built on the premise that a small group of experts can and should decide what information the public receives. This is a paternalistic, anti-democratic, and ultimately unscientific approach, science, and therefore all real progress depends on the capacity for any theory, no matter how cherished, to be ruthlessly and publicly challenged. The same principle applies to political discourse. The sense of urgency cannot be overstated. The United States is entering a new era of political volatility. The ability of citizens to coordinate, communicate, and challenge power without fear of immediate deplatforming is the single most important defense against authoritarianism, no matter what political flag it flies under. Groups that are attacking X today, claiming to be fighting hate, will become the tools of the state tomorrow, used to silence legitimate political opposition. You need to secure your freedom now, before the tools of censorship are perfectly engineered. The structural remedy, which we will detail in Part 3, involves not just transparency and economic independence, but a radical rethinking of how digital platforms interact with international law and, critically, how we can leverage the power of decentralization to make the digital public square impervious to the coercive tactics of political pressure groups once and for all. It's time to build a platform that simply cannot be extorted. We have established the core problem. The ADL and similar groups are using the advertiser chokehold and algorithmic coercion to enforce the principle of least objectionable truth, effectively attempting to financially starve the digital public square into submission. My commitment is not just to fight back against this coercion, but to engineer a systemic solution, a future blueprint for discourse that is resilient to this kind of centralized pressure, ensuring the non-negotiable principle of free speech remains viable. This leads us directly into the deep mechanics of the solution, focusing on the future of platform governance and global technological defense. Point 5, decentralization as the ultimate censorship shield. If the platform is centralized, it can be coerced. It's a single point of failure. The ultimate defense against the political pressure of the narrative industrial complex is not better rules or better moderation. It is decentralization. This is a concept I am deeply committed to, from building out Starlink's global mesh network to the integration of open source protocols into X. When a platform's foundational layer is decentralized, there is no single corporate headquarters to picket, no single CEO to threaten with a lawsuit, and critically, no single advertising chief whose budget can be held hostage. The power to enforce speech codes is distributed away from a small corporate elite and back to the global community of users, developers, and data scientists. Think of it like this. The ADL and its allies are accustomed to fighting a traditional war against a conventional corporate enemy where they can bomb the supply lines, the ad dollars. Decentralization is an act of digital asymmetrical warfare. It means that even if they manage to block one access point or coerce one node, the rest of the network, the information itself, remains flowing. They can attempt to boycott X Corp, but they cannot boycott the open source protocol upon which the future of the digital town square is built. This is why I have focused resources on integrating and supporting decentralized standards. It is the engineering move required to secure freedom. For the USA audience, this is the technological embodiment of the federalist system. Just as power is distributed between federal and state authorities, we must distribute the power of digital governance. This structural shift is what the establishment fears most because it permanently undermines their ability to centralize and command the narrative. The ability to coordinate information is their most precious asset. decentralization is the ultimate destruction of that asset. This structural resilience ties directly into the repetitive reinforcement of my core mission. A multiplanetary civilization requires a censorship-resistant communication network. If Earth's discourse is easily controlled by a handful of interconnected groups, that same vulnerability will propagate to Mars, making the entire human project politically fragile. The fight against institutional coercion on X is the proof of concept for securing the nervous system of the species. Point 6. Weaponizing transparency and legal counteroffense. We cannot only rely on technological defense, we must engage in proactive legal counteroffense. The second pillar of our structural solution is weaponizing transparency. This goes beyond merely open sourcing the algorithm. It involves exposing the mechanics of the coercion itself to sunlight. When a group like the ADL makes a claim of an explosion of hate speech on X, we are now responding with raw, unfiltered data, not just statements. We publish internal metrics, and where legally permissible, we expose the source of the financial and reputational pressure. The data rarely supports their claims. Often the narrative of rampant hate is disproportionate to the actual volume, or is based on highly dubious methodologies. The ADL's power relies on the assumption that they are the sole arbiters of moral authority and that their data is sacrosanct. We are calling that bluff, publicly and repeatedly. More importantly, the threatened and sometimes executed legal action against these organizations is crucial. They are operating in a gray zone, abusing the protections afforded to nonprofit entities while engaging in what amounts to politically motivated economic sabotage. When I threatened to file a defamation lawsuit, it was not an emotional response. It was a calculated, strategic move to force them to open their books and their internal communications, and to reveal the coordinated nature of their pressure campaigns. The legal strategy is predicated on a simple question: can a nonprofit organization claim moral authority while simultaneously orchestrating the financial destruction of a constitutionally protected public forum? The answer, legally and ethically, should be no. By forcing this question into the courts, we are creating a new legal framework that will shield future platforms from similar attacks. This is not about winning a settlement, it is about establishing a legal precedent that protects freedom of press for a platform that serves as the new digital backbone of American and global discourse. This is the sense of urgency distilled. If we allow the ADL to successfully establish the precedent that they can financially ruin a public forum based on subjective and politicized claims, then every platform, every news outlet, and every future medium will live in perpetual fear of the coercive elite. Your finances, your future, and your freedom are all wrapped up in the success of this legal counteroffensive. If the cost of maintaining a public square is financial ruin, then no one will ever attempt it again. Point 7, the uncomfortable alliance and the future of the MAGA movement. Finally, let's return to the uncomfortable political alliance with the 45th president. It is not an alliance of ideology. It is an alliance of shared institutional targeting. The reason this seems so unsettling to the mainstream media is that they want the world to be a neat dichotomy: Silicon Valley tech, progressive versus MAGA conservative. But the real cleavage is now the institutional core versus the anti-establishment periphery. Trump's political existence is defined by his rejection of the mainstream media and institutional gatekeepers. My mission is defined by the technological mandate to decentralize and open information flows. The forces arrayed against us, the legacy media, the compliant corporate sector, the political nonprofits like the ADL, are the same forces. Our shared experience demonstrates a powerful, undeniable truth. The establishment will use any weapon, including charges of bigotry, to protect its monopoly on truth and power. The future of the MAGA movement, or any populist movement, depends on its ability to communicate directly with its base without the institutional filter. My commitment is to ensure the platform exists for that communication to happen for all lawful political groups. This is the difference between a neutral conduit for speech and a politically engineered echo chamber. I believe the American experiment is strong enough to handle uncomfortable speech. The people who oppose my vision believe the masses must be protected from themselves by a self-appointed elite. The resolution of this conflict is not a political negotiation. It is a technological and legal victory for the foundational American principle of free inquiry. The battle with the ADL is the final proving ground. If we secure the platform's financial and architectural independence now, we inoculate the world against this form of censorship forever. In the final part of this discussion, we will synthesize these points into a clear path forward and issue the direct call to action necessary to secure this victory. The architecture is set. The legal counteroffensive is underway. The only missing piece is your sustained attention and commitment to the future we are building. We have meticulously diagnosed the institutional attack on free speech, detailed the mechanics of the advertiser chokehold and algorithmic warfare, and outlined the technological and legal blueprints, decentralization, and weaponized transparency required to secure the digital public square. The convergence of my battle against coercion and the continued political fight of figures like Donald Trump is not a sideshow. It is the central conflict defining the boundary between an open, innovative future and a closed, managed, and ultimately failing one. The final piece of the future blueprint is the synthesis of this entire project into a sustainable, mission-driven ethos. Point 8, the ethics of risk and the cost of complacency. The core difference between the mission of X and the demands of its detractors, led by entities like the ADL, is a fundamental disagreement on the ethics of risk. They demand a risk-free information environment, a place where no one is ever offended or exposed to a challenging idea. I maintain that zero risk in discourse guarantees zero progress in civilization. In engineering, we understand that risk is not the enemy, unmanaged risk is. We launch rockets knowing the catastrophic potential, but we manage that risk through rigorous testing, redundant systems, and transparent failure analysis. We learn from the explosions. The ADL's approach to speech is to simply ban the explosion, to outlaw the attempt, and therefore outlaw the learning. This is intellectual cowardice, masquerading as moral integrity. My commitment to free speech is not an abstract, libertarian philosophical stance. It is a mission-critical safety protocol for the human species. How can we possibly solve the existential threat posed by artificial general intelligence if we have outsourced the governance of our core communication channel to a small group of fearmongers whose primary concern is managing corporate reputation? The future demands maximum intellectual throughput. It demands the friction and fire of uncomfortable, uncensored debate. The cost of complacency, the cost of letting the ADL and their allies win this fight is the death of the intellectual frontier. Let's apply the repetitive reinforcement principle one last time to crystallize the urgency. The fight for X's independence is the fight for humanity's best chance at a thriving, multi-planetary civilization. Every decision I make, from open sourcing the algorithm to confronting the advertiser boycotts, is filtered through this long-term civilizational lens. If Earth is too fragile to handle free speech, it is too fragile to send us to Mars. The ADL's success directly compromises your future and the trajectory of human progress. Point 9, the financial independence mandate, the ultimate defense against the advertiser chokehold, is not finding better advertisers, it is achieving financial independence from them. This is the most crucial operational mandate for X. When the platform is no longer structurally dependent on the highly sensitive, politically motivated advertising budgets of Fortune 500 companies, the entire coercive mechanism collapses. The pivot to a subscription-based model where validated, engaged users are the primary source of revenue is the only structural mechanism that guarantees the platform's integrity. The user pays a small fee not just for features, but for unfiltered, independent discourse. This shift is the economic moat against censorship. It legally and financially aligns the platform's interests with the individual user, the citizen, rather than the corporate gatekeeper. This is the key to securing your freedom. We are building a business where the user is the customer, not the product, and certainly not the political pawn of pressure groups. This is a difficult, painful, and economically volatile transition, precisely because the established powers know how existential it is to their control. They are fighting this transition with every tool they have, which is why the attacks have intensified. But once the financial backbone is robust, once user subscription revenue surpasses the political vulnerability of advertising, the entire narrative industrial complex loses its leverage overnight. This financial independence is what allows the platform to maintain the neutral conduit position required for democracy. It allows a voice for everyone, from the former president, whose politics you may despise, to the technologist, whose ideas challenge yours. The subscription is a fee for digital liberty. Synthesis. the future blueprint of discourse. The entire conflict, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and the ADL, is a single massive structural stress test on the architecture of modern discourse. The test is simple. Can free speech survive the age of institutional pressure and algorithmic control? My answer is a resounding yes, but only if we engineer the platform for resilience. This means technological defense, decentralization via open source protocols, making the network impossible to kill. Financial defense, a subscription-first model that makes the platform immune to the advertiser chokehold. Legal defense, proactive legal challenges to establish precedent against political economic sabotage. This blueprint secures your freedom, protects your finances from being manipulated by manufactured market uncertainty, and guarantees the future trajectory of human innovation. We are building the town square not just for Earth, but for the trajectory to Mars. A censorship-resistant platform is the only way forward. This is the ultimate moment of decision for the American digital public square. Complacency is compliance. Silence is surrender. We are building the technological shield, but you must provide the societal and financial commitment. First, subscribe and be verified. Your subscription is not just a payment for a blue check mark. It is a bulletproof financial commitment to the principle of free speech. It shifts the platform's loyalty from the censoring corporation to the sovereign user. It is the economic fuel that will make X immune to future extortion attempts. If you value your voice, make the financial commitment to secure it. Do it today. Second, engage and challenge. Do not let the pressure groups define the boundaries of your discussion. Use the platform for aggressive, honest, and high-quality debate. Bring your best data, your sharpest analysis, and your deepest questions. The way we defeat the principle of least objectionable truth is by overwhelming it with the power of actual valuable truth. Third, share this analysis. The media is trying to bury this narrative. They want you to believe this is a fight between two billionaires and a nonprofit. The truth is, this is a fight for the future blueprint of your unconstrained freedom. Share this video and make sure every American understands that their future depends on the outcome of this battle for the digital public square. Final challenge. I want to know where you stand. In the comments below, use the hashtag #FutureBlueprint and tell me, what is the single most important American freedom that you believe is currently under threat from institutional overreach? Engage with that question. The answer will define the next phase of this fight. Subscribe, engage, share. Let's build the future, one free thought at a time.